Good morning. My name is Matthew R. Kearns, and I serve as the Associate Director of Member and Alumni Relations for Focus St. Louis. Focus is a non-for-profit organization. Our mission is to educate leaders, connect leaders, and facilitate important conversations for St. Louis and our surrounding region. Today is a sneak peek of our new series, Focus, Elevate Leadership, a continuing education program designed to fulfill our purpose of continuing to inspire and equip leaders. These professional development courses will immerse participants in breakthrough thinking in order to grow their confidence, knowledge, and networks. Today's topic, what your people need from you as a leader right now. Our guest, Jeb Bates, is an executive coach with leadership development consultant working with top leaders, senior professionals, and high performance teams to build their capacities, expand their impact, and deliver results. Prior to building his consulting and coaching practice, his career included positions at IBM, Lotus Development Corporation, Productivity Point International, Business Land Inc., Boston University, and the University of New Hampshire. Jeb is a professional certified coach through the International Coaching Federation and is an adjunct faculty member at Pepperdine University. Jeb will deliver content this morning for the first half hour of our presentation, and directly following his presentation, we'll take questions from the audience. I ask that you submit your questions via chat to me, and I will read them to the entire forum for Jeb to answer. We'll try to make it to everyone's question, but if we're unable to answer yours, you can email me at matthewk@focus-stl.org, and I'll reach out to Jeb with them and reply to your answer. Please turn all of your microphones off. Focus St. Louis would like to thank our lead sponsor, Citi, and our presenting sponsor, Daugherty Business Solutions, for this opportunity. And now, good morning, Jeb.
Well, thank you, Matthew. Thanks for that great introduction. Wow, I hope I'm that guy that you gave the description about here. I'm very pleased to be here working with Focus St. Louis today. I'm excited about sharing some of these things. And my question to those that are joining us here today is like, what if you knew what would help your people, your staff, to be able to be more focused, more resilient, more engaged as you go through these challenges that are going on right now for all of us here. My job today is to share with you 5 strategies and some very practical things that you can do right now that will help your people actually be able to navigate their way through all this change. And the practices we're going to share aren't just for this time of turbulence. They're sort of great leadership practices that we've been working with leaders around the world. And so we want to share those with you folks today. What I'm going to do here now is share my presentation. We'll talk a little bit in a moment about how you can get the notes for today. Great. Excellent. And as Matthew said, my name is Jeb Bates. I'm the CEO of a company called Thought Action. We do leadership development and executive coaching work. I have a team of coaches that work with me here. And for you folks in St. Louis, it's great to see you. I'm actually joining you today from Massachusetts, which is where I live. And I live right on Cape Cod. If any of you haven't been out this way, Cape Cod looks kind of like a muscle person flexing their muscles here. And I live at the very end of Cape Cod in a town called Provincetown. And Provincetown is a seasonal community. It's very busy in the summer. We have about 30,000 people here in the summer, and in the winter we have about 2,500. So the streets outside here today look probably like a lot like they do in your city. However, it's like that all the time in the winter here. So, and I work from my home. I've worked from my home for 20 years now with a virtual team that's scattered all over the country. So I've been doing a lot of the things that you folks are needing to do right now in this time. And so we want to share with you some of the leadership practices that will help you with the folks on your team. So as we look forward here, as it happens, I work from here, but I travel a lot. I was supposed to be in St. Louis last Friday doing a program, which of course, Matthew and I had to reschedule to August. It's a program called The Power to Perform. We'll talk a little bit about this later in case you might be interested in it. And we're going to share some things today that are excerpts from some pieces of that program as well. Our specialty as an organization is helping leaders be able to create the best results they can through self-understanding and really using the brain science of how we operate as human beings in their leadership. And so I want to share with you some of the insights from that and turned into practical things that you can do today. Now, we have a graphic here that illustrates some of these principles that we're going to be talking about here. You'll notice that there's a big gear in the background called identity and values. That's about who we are, what's important to you. And in the neuroscience research, it shows that that's a really key pivotal piece of being effective in creating our results. You'll also notice there's some gears that say goals, choices and options, actions. Those are very pragmatic, tangible things that we do in order to create results. But then there's a whole bunch of stuff that's under the surface that's largely invisible going on in our brains all the time. Those are the perceptions we have of things, the beliefs that we hold, the expectations that we set, the assumptions that we make, and then those habits of thinking behavior that really affect the way we choose, the way we look at things, and really affect our ability to create results. So each of us is walking around with this mechanism in our head, each sort of tuned to us each individually, and all of your employees are walking around with this system going on. So what I want to do today is give you some tips about how to make this work on your behalf and help your employees be able to make it through what we've got going on. Now, to make it easy for you, I've taken all of the stuff that we're going to talk about today and put it into a checklist for you that you can get as a handout, so you don't have to take all kinds of notes here. And actually, you can get it instantly right now if you want to by picking up your phone and texting lead now, all one word, lead now, to 33777. And we'll come back and ask you for your email address, and it will email you the handout for today right this minute. As well as some other information here. So if you have your phone and want to get the handout right now, just text. I'll remind you about this later if you don't get a chance to do it right now, but everything that we talk about here is reflected in this handout. So I'm going to share with you 5 little sort of scenarios and then tips about how to deal with them. The first is something I call the case of the rock and. The second case, the freakout. The third case, the whirlwind. The fourth, the applesauce factor, and case 5 is the roller coaster. And so we're going to talk about how to address these various phenomena that you might be experiencing with your people in this time of change. All right, so move forward, please. There we go. Great. So we're going to start with our first case, which is the rock and. And of course, the rock and leads to a rock and a hard place, which is often how we as leaders feel in this situation here. Our people need things from us, our organizations need something from us, and we're kind of stuck in the middle of all that. So let's talk a little bit about how we can handle that dynamic with our people, right? So the situation we're facing right now is, number one, a lack of clarity, right? It's uncertain what's going on. Sometimes we don't have the answers. We're being asked for answers by our people. So that's kind of a challenge here. Second is there's unanswerable questions. Sometimes we can't even share everything that we know with our people right now. Sometimes they're asking questions for which the answers have not been addressed or are in progress. And then finally, also, there's a whole wave of unpredictability, both in the world, in our families, in our organizations, amongst our customers or clients. All of that's going on right now together. Now, the deal is that the net effect of this, the issue for our employees is that they have discomfort with ambiguity. And there's a lot of ambiguity going on right now and not a lot of clarity. The thing is that clarity really brings people comfort, right? And so in the absence of clarity, it brings people discomfort. And you probably have experienced it yourself. You probably experienced it with your staff. And so being able to have clarity is helpful, but there's a lot of lack of clarity going on. So what do you do about it? So here's our first strategy for dealing with this, and that is let them know what they can count on, right? There's a lot that's vague here, but you want to focus people on what can they count on right now from you, from your organization, from other team members. What can they absolutely count on? Because that, in the absence of clarity, at least gives them some comfort in dealing with the ambiguity out there. So let me give you some suggestions about do's and don'ts in this situation. So the first thing is give them clarity as much as possible when you can. So be clear about it, share it with people. You might have to share it a couple different times by the time that people hear it, but make sure that you share with clarity everything you possibly can. Knowing that there are some things that aren't clear yet, or you may not have the ability to share right now, at least set the expectations for when you can't do clarity. So in other words, if we don't know right now, you can say to them, okay, we don't know right now, but next week I'll have some more information about that, or we're thinking that 2 weeks from now we'll be able to release something, or we'll have more information about reorganization or client challenges or whatever it is coming up, just tell them what they can expect. And if you do set that expectation, make sure you come through on it. Because really this is all about, it's not about the information, it's about their trust of what they can anchor on in the absence of all this clarity. With this anchor, then they can actually function instead of being stuck in ambiguity. And just a suggestion about things don't just tell them to deal with it and get over it, like life is gray, whatever it is. That's not going to help. Help them understand what it is they can do. The best practice for you really would be set up a routine of frequent communication with your team members, either collectively with the whole team or with individuals or both, right? So that people can count on when they're going to get information, and then even ask them about how frequently they want to have it. Sometimes people need it daily, sometimes they don't, right? So tune it to what they need, which will keep their anxiety level down. The second case is the freakout. And certainly perhaps you've seen on your teams around the world, people are flipped out right now. They're panicking, they're not sure what's going to happen, they're afraid of what's going to happen to them. Maybe there's been some organizational changes and so forth here. That's a big challenge here. And the situation is that, number one, there's a lot of rapid change going on, right? Even we know that what was true last week is no longer true this week. What was true the week before is no longer true. And if you think back, oh my gosh, February seems like a lifetime ago, right? So there's a lot of rapid change going on here that's swirling around us. Also, too, even those folks that are sort of dealing with it and trying to perform well in the situation get frustrated because they're running up against roadblocks. Either things aren't ready, systems aren't right, they're not getting quick responses, whatever that may be. So they're getting frustrated by not even being able to move forward. And then finally, change is hard. One of the things about our brains are that our brains really don't like change, right? Our brains are set up as engines that protect us and keep us alive. And several times a second, our brains are actually scanning for threats around us. And one of the things that our system perceives is that any kind of change is a threat. It likes what it knows already. It doesn't like what it doesn't know. And so any kind of change is a threat. And so our brains go into this sort of defensive mode, and it makes it really hard to change. It's hard to cope with the change. It's hard to make the change. It's hard to sustain the change, right? And so that's a fundamental piece of just how we are as human beings, yet it's working against us in this situation where there is so much rapid change. So the issue for you to deal with your employees really is resolving their anxiety, right? Helping them be able to deal with the frustration or the dissonance that's going on with all this change, right? So the solution for that is really about mindset. The solution to anxiety is about the mindset that people maintain, right? And perhaps you've heard about growth mindsets or fixed mindsets, but it's really about what you think. The neuroscience is what you think is what you create, right? So if you're expecting things are going to go well, your whole brain and system lines up to go in that trail. If you think everything's going to be catastrophe, that sometimes becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. So it's about mindset, and there's a whole field of psychology out there called positive psychology that really helps people focus on that. One of the key tenets of that is, for every negative thought, you really need to have like 3 positive thoughts in order to even be even on it, right? So our mindset is really key. Now, what that means as a manager here is that your strategy that we recommend is emphasize what is still the same, right? With all this turmoil going on and these radical changes and things being very different, people start to think about, oh my gosh, everything's different, everything's different, everything's different. When in fact, there's a lot of things that are really just the same. We're still trying to serve our customers. We're still trying to serve our clients. We still have a team. We're still talking. We're still doing these various things. So to focus, help keep them focused on what's the same, not what's different. That's not denying that things are different out there, but it's just playing down the importance of the change and playing up the importance of what we're still doing. So as a suggestion here in terms of do's, number 1 is any kind of changes that you need to announce or any kind of changes that people are dealing with, any kind of disruptions, just focus on what is still true, what's similar to what they've done in the past. People who are good at rolling out new systems, and perhaps you and your organization have had to deal with new software changes over time or something, people who roll out systems know that you don't go in saying, oh, we're putting in this great new system that's going to do all this great stuff and everything's going to be different. When you approach it that way, it freaks people out. What you want to say is, We're still going to have a system where we do the order entry. We are going to be able to go in and get detailed information for the customers on their inquiries. The screens are going to look a little bit different, but we're still going to be able to do just the same old things that we've done before. That's the way you want to frame it, as how things are very similar to what we've done. Also, too, realize that you may approach change differently than your people do, right? So, you may enjoy change, you may embrace change, you might like the variety, but your people may not, or vice versa, right? So just realize people have different thresholds of how they deal with change. And so the more you can focus on sameness, the more easily people can adapt to that. And then finally, also, make sure you're paying attention to those must-do things from your team or your organization that must get done. In other words, that you have to keep the same going on even if things are different. So if you are an organization or an industry that requires compliance, making sure that those pieces are in place. If there are critical activities for delivering your product or delivering your mission, making sure that those pieces are in place, even though things may have to be done differently, right? So the best practice for you really is, and also too, don't just tell them to get over it, right? Don't just tell them to quit whining here, right? Just like focus on helping them get through that change. And the best practice really is to be able to keep them focused on what they already know how to do in handling situations in the past. The reality is that even though we may be in unprecedented times and things might be somewhat different than before, it's really all a collection of a bunch of challenges grouped together that you probably have already solved individually at some time in the past. So instead of like doing the freak out for the future, just focus on what we know from the past and applying those skills and those experiences to how we solve today's problems. The third case is what we would call the whirling wind, okay? And as you know, stuff is going on crazy around us. We watch the news, we watch the TV, we talk to people. Everything is just swirling all around us, right? And so what that turns up for people is, number one, they start to feel overwhelmed, right? Or they're working from home, there's a lot of distractions and challenges, maybe families, maybe in a small space, you can't get out, all that kind of stuff. So that's adding to the disarray, the whirlwind, and the chaos out there, and people having to learn how to use new virtual tools that maybe they haven't done before, right? So being able to do all the stuff at once is really a challenging thing. So the challenge that people have in the situation is distraction. Squirrel. It's really helping people deal with the distraction and keep their focus. The focus is the important part of this. In the midst of all that distraction, helping people stay focused. So the strategy I'd like to offer here is either reestablish existing routines or add new routines. Routinize everything, right? Even if it's something you do all the time, make a routine out of it so that in the face of all this disruption around you, you can hold true to getting things done. So maybe there's a routine of self-care that you do. Maybe there's a routine of how you go about dealing with your productivity. And now you're working at home with your family around. What's the routine need to change to be? But make it a routine for yourself and for your team and for others. So in terms of do's here, one is encourage people to keep at these routines until they have that new rhythm. They might be doing things differently. It takes a while to get into the groove on it and make it the new normal. And sometimes people give up before the miracle occurs, right? So help them keep at it to get the new rhythm. And invite people to make checklists of the things that they need to do, right? Their routines out there. If you're familiar with what airline pilots do, they've taken off and landed planes jillions of times, but still every time they come into the cockpit, they and their co-pilot go down a checklist of the setup for the flight, making sure that all the instruments in the plane are set up correctly. They've done it a million times, but making it a checklist for themselves ensures that they do it right. And if things start to go wrong, they turn to their checklist and go procedurally through how they do it in order to stay on track and not get distracted, to keep their focus on solving what's in front of them. So make checklists. And then use your individual team, your team time or your individual time together, not just for updates on what's going on here, but to talk about, let's design some new routines for dealing with these things that we have going on so that we all agree to it, we know what the process is, we can have our own checklist, and then we can keep things moving even though there's disarray. And you may need to modify those routines periodically because things change. But use some of your time, not just on the task, but on the process of how you folks need to work together to get it done. In terms of a don't just let them flounder and languish by themselves. Encourage them to structure what they're doing into some kind of routine. So your best practice really is To lead by example, create your own routines and checklists, share them with your team so that they know how to do it, and then also keep your sanity in the process. Our fourth story is called the applesauce factor. I'm sure you're wondering what that means here. It's really about how in our brains, the way our brains operate is we're connection engines, we're pattern matching engines. We try to make associations between things here. And so we start to, over time, we learn how to associate things together. And those associations become sort of firm beliefs about them. So as an example, if I were to introduce and ask you, what do you like to eat as a companion to pork chops, right? Many people in the US culture might say something like applesauce goes with pork chops. So what goes together? Applesauce, pork chops, maybe there's something else that you like as well, but that's the applesauce metaphors. Our brain has got this association that these two things must go together. For you, when you think about the Super Bowl, right? What are the foods that go with the Super Bowl for you? Is it nachos, bean dip, beer, something else, right? What do you associate with that? In your mind, these things must go through or it isn't a great Super Bowl party. When you think about a turkey dinner, right? What goes with turkey in your mind? For some people, it's gravy or stuffing or cranberries or mashed potatoes, something like that. You have an association, right? Because if someone were to say, you know what, you're going to sit down to this whole family dinner of turkey, and we're going to have pizza also and guacamole. Some people would be like, no, this just isn't right somehow, right? So in our brains, we've made these rules for ourselves, right? And these rules consist of two things. One is either things that must always go together or things that can never go together. And when we make these associations, they're largely invisible to us. They're in that invisible zone in the back of our minds, yet they're driving the way we do things, right? And what that does is it limits our options and limits our flexibility. So let me give you some examples of that. So for instance, somebody who might say, you know, John is the only one who could do that, right? These two things are, John's the only one, these must go together. You mean there isn't somebody else that, you know, if John's sick, couldn't do it or learn to do it, or two people could pitch in and solve that together, or we could get some outside help? Is if by thinking that John's the only one to do it, we stay stuck in a certain mindset and a certain hole. Another example, you know, if we lose more staff, we'll never be able to get the work done. Two things that can never go together. If we don't have this staffing level, we can't get the work done. Really? You know, the month-end closing has got to be perfect before we can make any decisions. Well, that's well and good, but do we really want to be halted if we get disrupted in our month-end? Maybe we could make some decisions, or maybe we could make some provisional decisions based on that. We don't have to be stopped by it. These things don't have to go together. Or, you know, if this goes on much longer, we won't ever catch up, right? So, well, wait a minute, couldn't we do that? Is that really possible? Is that the only choice here? And so what you want to be doing is thinking about for yourself and for your team, where am I making these applesauce associations, these things that must always go together or things that can never go together, because that's limiting your flexibility and looking for what other possibilities might there be, okay? So the premise here, or the issue here for people, is that they're living from the story in their head that they've made up rather than what the reality is around them. And as long as we're telling that same story to ourselves, we can never do anything differently. And we're stuck, right? I've spent a lot of time in my career working with executives and helping them get unstuck. And it's usually because there's a bunch of these applesauce things going on in their head that they don't even realize. So your strategy here with your people for dealing with this is to be their coach, right? As a professional coach, I'm an outside party. I talk to my client, I listen to them, and I help them see things that they're not realizing or they're not seeing about themselves, or associations or thinking that they might be keeping them stuck where they are. So for you, kind of the do's are, number one, listen as you're listening to your people talk. Are they making some kind of conclusions or assumptions about rules in their head that they think are the only way we can do things here? That's not going to serve you in a highly challenging and challenging climate, right? And challenge their assumptions on it. Does it really have to be that way? You can invite them to come up with it. So what other possibilities might there be? If we weren't able to do that, what else could we do, right? So opening up the possibilities there. Second is also helping you keep the focus on the future rather than the past, or sometimes even the present. If people are stuck in the story, here's what happened, here's what he said, here's what she said, all that kind of stuff, that's the past. If they're telling you a story, they're stuck in the loop, okay? So what you want to focus forward is, regardless of that, let's focus on what we need to do today going forward from here. Keep the focus always future oriented. And if you're starting to get stuck in the past, switch to the future. And then finally, what you want to do in coaching your people is, number one, focus first on your strongest people. They're the ones most likely to be able to sustain you as you pull out of the ditch, right? And then focus on those for whom, if they weren't able to keep up, what would be a mission critical issue that would really interrupt the way that you do things or the way your organization delivers its mission, right? So focus first on your strongest people. Usually people's inclination is, I should work on my weakest people, but no, focus on your strongest people first. They will keep the muscle moving in your organization, and then focus on those folks that are really critical to the delivery of your mission or your business. And just as a don't just walk away from it. You need to be involved in helping people see these things so that they can get out of the stuck place that they're likely to be in, or bump up against roadblocks that are caused by their thinking. So the best practice for you really is checking with them about what they might need from you as their coach to help them through solving their problems going forward with all the problems that are being presented. The final story here is what we call the roller coaster. And all of us, I'm sure, have been through this, where right now everything's up and down. All you have to do is watch the news every day, and it's an emotional roller coaster all the time. The same thing in our organizations with what's happening, how we're trying to keep things going in the face of all the change, the disruption, not being able to leave home, not being able to be in the office, not being able to be with people. It's a real emotional roller coaster. And so the situation we end up facing is, number one, people end up ultimately getting disengaged by all of that sort of up and down. They get exhausted by it, right? Also, too, sometimes people start to put up resistance to things, resistance to change, because their resilience is low. And eventually, if this keeps up, people get to a full state of burnout where they're just incapable of doing anything. They're paralyzed, or they just sort of drop away. So let's look at what we can do to actually help that. It's really about helping people with their resiliency and their resourcefulness in navigating all of this without being burnt out. So our fifth strategy here is really focus on the core needs that your people have that keep them moving forward, that keep them energized, that keep them motivated, right? Now, when we talk about this idea of core needs, right, we all have a series of core needs. These are things that give us positive energy. They're sort of buckets that bring us up rather than bring us down, right? And so if you look at this picture, these people working together and colleagues, this might be representing people who might have a need to problem solve, or to accomplish things, or do important work, or maybe any of those things, right? In this picture, these people might have a core need in themselves for fun, or for friendship, or shared experiences, or they might have a need for adventure, or excitement, or risk-taking, or maybe even they might have a need for competition, or achievement, or physical challenges. Or they might have a need for teamwork, connection, collaboration. So these are not the only possible ones, but just to give you some idea, we all have a set of needs inside of us, things that fill us up, that give us energy, that energize us, right? We all have maybe, I don't know, between 8 and maybe 20 of these needs for ourselves, each in our own unique configuration of them. But if these needs are not getting met, what they end up doing is bringing us down. So as an example, right now, someone who has a high need for connection is maybe struggling a bit here, because their usual way of getting their connection need met is the weekly staff meeting, where they get to see their colleagues, hang out, maybe laugh a little, and so forth. And when we can't physically be together, suddenly that need is not being met. But it doesn't mean it can't be. There are ways to find that connection even if you can't be there in person, which is the way that you're used to, right? One great way to connect others is with stories, right? So having people share pictures of their lives or stories. A great thing to do is actually to share about a great experience that you've had, and have people talk about that, right? Because that story creates connection between you. So finding an alternative strategy for how you get your needs met, if your current way, your usual way is not working, is really key here. Because what these core needs are is like they're your gas tanks. Each one of these core needs is a gas tank for you, whether it's achievement, connection, teamwork, accomplishment, whatever that may be. And we work well and we're powered well when our gas tanks are full. But if they start to get drained, that's when we move into demotivation, disengagement, and even burnout, right? And when we talk a lot about employee engagement, employees are engaged when their gas tanks are full. That's the way that it works. And so your strategy really is about identifying the core needs of your staff members, kind of look at what it is that they like, what it is that they enjoy, and help them figure out how to get it done, right? And if someone's having a challenging day or a frustrating day, you can ask them, so you seem really frustrated here, kind of which of your needs is really feeling like it isn't getting met today? And see, is there some other way to do it, right? And then finally, you also want to know what your own core needs are, right? Because number one, you need to be sustained in this process, as well as being able to know how you might be different than your employee. You and your employee might both have a need for accomplishment and achievement, but your brand of it and their brand of it is a little bit different. And so if I'm making assumptions about what you might like to achieve rather than listening to the way that you want to do it, I'm not going to meet your need, right? And so you're going to actually be unhappy. I could give you the great project that I think would be great, but you might not think that way. So really understanding the depth of someone's core needs is key. In this process, one of the things I want to do to help you with this is we also offer another free webinar from Thought Action called Getting Your Needs Met in Uncertain Times. And it's about sort of what our core needs. It goes a little bit deeper on these things that we've been talking about, help you look a bit at your own core needs and some strategies for getting them met. And so if you've asked for the handout by texting lead to lead now at 33777, in there is information about how to sign up for this free other webinar that we offer. I'd like to have that be a gift to you so that you can get your own core needs met. In terms of don'ts, don't ignore their core needs. Ignore their core needs at your peril, right? Because it's either going to be working for you and keeping positive and motivated, or it's going to be working against you. So the best practice really is help your people see how maybe they could get their core needs met differently since things are disrupted, right? And use some creativity in thinking about that. So today we've gone through and shared a bunch of different issues and some strategies about that. First of all, let people know what they can count on, right? So give them clarity, and where you can't, set the expectations. Emphasize what's the same rather than everything being really different. Reestablish or add routines so that things can get done even in the face of uncertainty and a whirlwind. Be the coach to them and help them explore their thinking and maybe their blind spots, and help them actually work through problems rather than being stuck. And then finally, focus on their core needs so that they can maintain their motivation and their engagement and their resiliency. So it's really been a pleasure working with you folks today. Again, if you didn't get a chance to get a hold of the handout that summarizes all these things we've shared, you can text lead now to 33777. If you don't have your phone handy, you can jot it right down now, and then after the call, you can actually text it at any time and get that in the process. As I mentioned, I'm going to be in St. Louis in August for our day-long program called The Power to Perform, which is really about how do you use your own neurosystem and brain science to be able to create results for yourself. It's a day-long program, and what we're going to cover is understanding kind of how neuroscience of change works and how to handle it on your behalf instead of getting in your way. It's also going to help you identify your own personal result system, all what your gears are and how to make them work in the direction that creates the results you want, how to move beyond those invisible stuck places for yourself in order to get new performance, how to expand your options and looking at choices in order to reach the goals that you have, also help you kind of get rid of those personal barriers that might be holding you back. And then finally, by the end of the session, you're actually going to have created a tangible roadmap that you're going to walk out with in your hand of an action plan of how you can jumping into action to be able to move forward on getting these results. And so in a day, you're going to actually be harnessing your own system to create greater performance for yourself. It's designed for leaders, it's designed for professionals, anybody who really wants to understand how do I use my own brain, my physiology, and my system to be able to make this work. If you'd like to enroll in this program, again, we've got the URL here, focus-stl.org/elevate. And in the texted handout, I've included the program description for it, as well as a handout about this internal system to give you some tips about how to master it for yourself. And so if you haven't had a chance to get the handout, please go ahead and do that. So I'm hoping that I'll get to see you all in August in St. Louis. I hope maybe some of you will join us for the free webinar on getting your core needs met. And what I'd like to do, Matthew, is kind of turn it back over to you. And I'm happy to take any questions that people have. So thank you, everybody. It's been a pleasure to be here.
Thank you, Jeb. It's so important, the information that you're sharing today. And I think so many people have so many questions about this time that we're actually in and are just wondering how to get through it. So if anybody has any questions, go ahead and put them in the chat panel now, and we will we'll share them with Jeb and we'll get them answered. Let's see. So someone wants to know, they have a large team and they want to know about connecting with everybody on the team. Do you have any thoughts about that and keeping the team interconnected?
Great, so that's a great question, and I often get that. One of the things to think about is, we talked about this idea of core needs. Some people have different needs for connection and communication. So some people, need frequent communication, others do not. Some people would like to talk in a group rather than individually here. And so if you think about your team and sort of think about what their preferences are, perhaps you can group things such that you can deal with this very large team and all the contact they may need and kind of optimize it. Some people are happy with just the weekly staff meeting or the Zoom call or whatever that may be. Other people may need to have a one-on-one with you in order to be able to deal with all these things that we've been talking about here today. Some people can just, an email touch point is good enough for them, right? So thinking about the needs of these individuals and then kind of categorizing themselves and maybe even checking in with them for the first time, like, okay, what communication do you need from me, or what connection do you need from me? Then you can set the tone for what's going to be the optimal way for you to use your time to meet all those various needs.
Cool. There's another question about online and screen fatigue and how we manage the team, and when we're staring at screens all day now and even like interacting on screens. Any thoughts about that?
Absolutely. And as I mentioned, I've been doing this for 20 years. I have clients all over the world. I'm on Zoom all day long, and I have been for a very long time. What I've discovered is that Zoom fatigue is actually real. And even just being on for a short period of time, what I've had to do is structure. Remember, we talked about the routine. I've had to structure bigger gaps between my Zoom calls to go out and take a walk around the deck in the house, right? You don't realize that attention that our brains are using are constantly being absorbed by these electronic media. You need to have some kind of break, and it may mean that you can't do back-to-back conversations. You may need to spread it out. You'll find what your sort of level of resiliency is about that, but it is a real thing, and you can't spend every minute of the day in Zoom calls all day long. You just cannot do it. So find your path for that and set your routine for it.
So there's so much uncertainty and change right now. Any strategies to share information with the caveat that this is what we know, quote unquote, right now? It seems just when we have a plan, the circumstances are upended and change.
So that's a great question, and everybody is really dealing with that. I hear that a lot, and I think this is about what we were saying about, like, have clarity about what you do know and you can share. And this is part of setting that expectation. Some of the expectation you just said is, this is the way it is today. It may be different tomorrow, but here's what you can count on from me. I will be honest with you, or I will tell you as soon as I know, or we'll have these regular check-ins and I'll share everything that I've got. Like, let them know what they can count on about that. And some of it is just that everything's changing day to day. So what you can count on is there'll be a daily email from me with an update, or every 2 days I'll do this. Let them know what they can count on with it. I know it's not necessarily the answer that they want to hear, but it will give them some of that level of comfort that will help them at least feel better about it. And just know you can't meet everybody's needs for clarity and certainty. You just have to do the best you can. But if you're clear about the expectations, it will go a long way to help them deal with it.
So there's a question about scheduling. So we used to be 9 to 5, 8:30 to 5, and now we're 8:30 to 2, teach the kids from 2:30 till 4, get back on, have some dinner, come back on, et cetera, et cetera. When talking about routine, how do I deal with the uncertainty of a routine where I'm now a middle school teacher, as well as an employee, as well as still the guy at home who's got to make dinner for the whole family and walk the dog occasionally?
Yes, and that's sort of the challenge that we have here with everybody being not being able to go out here. And what I'd say is, my first question is your job doable if you break it up like that? Because that's sort of the necessity. Yeah, but is it doable? I mean, You know, does your employer give you the flexibility to do that? Can it work for you if you're working around? And just try to schedule. And the challenge with family is you try to put kids on as much of a routine as you can, or a structure for it.
Yeah.
And then you just sort of do it with you. But remember that thing about your own core needs, right? You can't be giving to everybody all the time, whether that's your employees, whether it's your kids, your spouse, your family members, your parents who are struggling, whatever that may be, right? You have to build in some ways to make sure your core needs are getting met. So if you know what those are, build those little pieces in places. I personally have a core need for some reflection and relaxation time. I can't go all day long, one after the other, without taking a little bit of a breather here. I had one client who had that need, who worked in an extremely busy office that was very chaotic, very noisy, maybe like your home is now. And what he realized was that somebody in the office had to go get the mail every day from the other office across the street. They have to go down in the elevator, across the street, up in the elevator on the other side, get the mail, come down the elevator, across the street, back up in the elevator twice a day. That was his way of just breaking the stuff. It was a simple thing. It did not take a lot of time, but it fulfilled that core need of his to be able to do it, and it worked with the schedule. So maybe it's being a little creative about where could you get your needs met so that you have the energy to be able to deal with all of these other changes in schedule and challenges.
Yeah, so we have time for about one or two more questions. And this question I think is interesting. So you mentioned getting the mail from the other office. How as a leader, how do I delegate, oh, you're the person that has to go in and take care of A, B, and C, when we're in a shelter at home situation, when we've been told to consider not going to those places, but we still need to get that mail and get it opened, or take care of vital necessities that only can take place inside of the office? Great.
So that's a great question. And obviously right now, the first consideration is safety, right? Mm-hmm. So maybe there's a designated individual who has access to it that could do it because of the proximity to the office, or, you know, that you have a way of making sure that the mail is safe for people to look at, or I don't know, there perhaps is some designated way that within whatever the strictures are in your municipality you can do, right? So maybe it's looking for volunteers. You know, remember, that might also fulfill the core needs of someone. Someone sometimes has a core need for important work, and right now they're at home and they're dealing with the arithmetic of the kids, and it just, while that's great and that's important, it doesn't have that gravity of doing something significant. But if you're the person that really is helping out everybody in the office and making a difference and making the business or the work continue because you do this visit to the office once a week or twice a week to get the mail and solve it, that can actually be something that makes someone feel really good. So who in your office can do that it would fulfill one of their core needs? So it's not so much maybe even pointing the finger at someone, but seeing who has got the opportunity and which of their core needs might it meet such that they're willing to maybe go the extra mile even.
Great. Jeb, thank you. Thank you for taking time.
Oh, it's my pleasure.
Thank you for sharing this really important information. And I want to tell everybody one more time that our Elevate series is definitely in full swing. Stop back by next Friday. You can see Justine Froker, who is a Dare to Lead certified trainer, which is Brene Brown's work. And she's going to be having a great conversation at 11 o'clock Central Time. And all you have to do to be in part of that is register at the Focus website. Jeb is going to be with us in person in August, hopefully when this is all passed and we can be in a room together again and be safe about it. And tell us one more time about the workshop that we can join with you.
Great. So the Power to Perform workshop will really help you understand how to use your own internal system to create higher performance and greater success in creating the results that you want. And you walk away with a tangible roadmap to jump on the action, which is usually where people get stuck. And so you'll walk away with that for yourself. Encourage your colleagues and your teammates, maybe even your family members, to attend so that they can do the same thing for themselves.
And one more time, I certainly want to thank our lead sponsor, Citi, and I want to thank Daugherty Business Solutions, our presenting sponsor, for making all of this possible. Jeb, thank you. Thank you, everybody who attended. This has been recorded and will go up online. You can watch it at our website or on our social media. We got to thank you, saying very insightful with concise strategies. Yay, thanks, everybody. We'll see you soon. Jeb, I'll talk to you soon. Have a great day, everybody.
Thank you
so much.